The meeting of Keanu Reeves and Sydney Sweeney turned into an unforgettable moment. The room was quiet at first, but the silence carried a kind of weight that no one could ignore. People had gathered for a charity event, one where faces from different worlds came together. There were actors, writers, young artists, and people who had struggled but never gave up. It was an evening meant to celebrate resilience and kindness. Yet, for many, the most talked about thing was not the stage or the speeches, but the meeting that happened in one corner of the hall. Keanu Reeves walked in with the same gentle presence that people always spoke about. There was no grand entrance, no loud applause following him, only the quiet respect that seemed to surround him everywhere he went. He nodded to the staff, thanked the volunteers, and even paused to greet a boy who was standing shyly by the wall. The boy's eyes lit up, and Keanu bent down, shaking his hand as if he was meeting someone important. It was small, but it set the tone of who he was. On the other side of the room, Sydney Sweeney had just arrived. Her smile was bright, but there was also a touch of nervous energy in her eyes. She was not nervous about fame or cameras, but because she felt the weight of being at an event that carried real meaning. She had grown up knowing how important respect was, and she wanted to honor the moment. She greeted the families sitting in the front rows, asking them about their journeys, listening to their voices with full attention. Then it happened. Their paths crossed. At first it was simple, two people walking in opposite directions and noticing each other, but the way their eyes met made it feel different. Keanu paused, and Sydney slowed her step. It was not the kind of meeting filled with noise, but with a quiet spark, as though both of them understood something unspoken. Sydney extended her hand and said softly, "I've always admired the way you treat people with kindness." Her voice carried sincerity, not performance. Keanu looked at her, and for a brief second he seemed to search for the right words. Then he smiled, not the kind of smile meant for cameras, but the kind that reaches the eyes. "Respect goes further than talent," he replied, "and I see that in the way you carry yourself." People nearby pretended not to listen, but every word felt like it left a mark. It was rare to hear two people in such a public world speak so plainly about humility. Yet, that was only the beginning. Just as the conversation began, a small moment tested them. A worker carrying a tray tripped near the corner. Glasses shattered, and the hall filled with the sound of breaking. Some guests turned away, some laughed awkwardly, but Sydney immediately moved to help. She bent down to pick up the pieces, even though her dress was far too elegant for the floor. Keanu joined her without hesitation, steadying the worker with a hand on his shoulder, saying, "It's all right. No harm done." For a second, the entire room saw it. Two people on the ground, helping, not because it looked good, but because it was the human thing to do. And in that second, whispers spread. "Did you see that?" someone said. "They didn't think twice," another replied. But for Keanu and Sydney, it was not about being seen. As they rose from the floor, they looked at each other. And in their eyes was something stronger than words. A silent agreement that respect and kindness should never be forgotten. It was the start of something that no one expected. Their meeting, so ordinary in appearance, began to hold the shape of an unforgettable moment, one that would carry forward with ripples neither of them could yet see. The weight of words, the air inside the hall felt warmer after that small scene. People were no longer only watching the event on stage. Many eyes kept drifting toward Keanu and Sydney, not because they were famous, but because of what they had just done. It was a reminder that kindness, when shown without thought, has more power than any planned speech. Sydney brushed the dust from her dress and laughed softly. "I guess that wasn't the way I thought this night would go," she said, her tone light but her eyes still carrying a spark of emotion. Keanu shook his head, smiling. "Sometimes the unexpected shows us who we really are. I think tonight is about that. Not about names, but about moments." The words settled in Sydney's heart. She had been nervous before, but his calm presence made her feel steady. Yet, beneath her calm smile, her mind was racing. She thought of the people in the crowd, people who had faced battles no camera ever showed, families who had lost everything but still came here with hope. She felt she had to do more than just appear. She wanted her actions to mean something. As they walked together toward the center of the hall, a young woman approached them. She was holding a notebook pressed against her chest. Her hands trembled as she looked at Keanu and then at Sydney. I don't mean to interrupt, the young woman said, her voice shaking. I just wanted to say thank you. I watched both of you in movies when I was younger, but it's not the movies that helped me the most. It was knowing you were real people who showed respect. It made me believe I could keep going. Sydney's eyes softened. She reached out, touching the girl's hand gently. You've already shown more strength than most people ever will. You should be proud of that. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice low and steady. Whatever happens, never forget your value. The world will try to make you doubt it, but don't let it take that from you. Tears filled the girl's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release, as if someone had lifted a heavy weight from her shoulders. She nodded and walked back toward her seat, holding her notebook tighter, as though it now carried hope. The moment struck everyone around them. It was quiet, yet powerful. Whispers grew again, but this time they carried a tone of respect. But just as the evening seemed calm, tension found its way in. A guest, older and dressed in expensive clothes, walked up with a smirk on his face. He glanced at Sydney, then at Keanu, and said loudly enough for others to hear, "You two may think picking up broken glass makes you saints, but in this world, people remember stars for their spotlight, not their humility." The words cut through the hall like a sharp blade. Some people looked uncomfortable, others shifted away, but no one spoke. Sydney felt her chest tighten. For a second, doubt entered her heart. She wondered if showing kindness in public would always be seen as weakness. But before she could respond, Keanu turned to the man. His voice stayed calm, but it carried strength. "Spotlight fades," Keanu said, his eyes steady. "What remains is how you made people feel. Respect doesn't end when the cameras stop." A silence followed. The man's smirk faltered and he stepped back. People in the room watched, not with laughter or gossip, but with quiet reflection. Sydney looked at Keanu in that moment with new understanding. It was not just his fame that drew people to him. It was the weight of his words. They were not loud, but they carried truth. As the evening continued, the atmosphere changed. People spoke softer, treated the staff with more care, and seemed to remember why they were there. It was not a night for pride. It was a night for humility. And deep inside, Sydney realized this meeting was already changing her. She had come thinking it would be another event, another speech, another photograph. But instead, she was standing beside someone who reminded her that small acts could create unforgettable moments. And she knew this was only the beginning of what the night still held, the test of silence. The night moved forward, but the air inside the hall felt heavier. Something about the exchange with the older guest lingered in the background. People pretended to carry on with soft laughter and polite talk, but there was an invisible line dividing the room. Some admired the kindness they had seen, while others whispered doubts, questioning if humility could truly survive in a world built on pride. Sydney felt that weight pressing on her. As she stood near the tables, she noticed the way eyes followed her, some filled with admiration, others filled with judgment. She turned slightly toward Keanu, as if searching for strength in his presence. Keanu's face was calm, but his eyes carried a quiet awareness. He could sense the room's unease. He leaned toward Sydney and whispered, "Don't let their silence scare you. Sometimes silence speaks more than words. It tests us." She nodded slowly, though a part of her still wrestled with doubt. She thought about her journey, how often people had underestimated her, how many times she had been told she was too young or too soft for serious respect. Tonight, standing in front of so many eyes, those old doubts returned like shadows. Then the host of the evening stepped onto the stage. The lights dimmed, and the crowd shifted their focus. The host spoke about resilience, about families who had overcome loss, about children who had learned to walk again after injuries, about parents who carried hope despite their struggles. The stories were powerful, but each one also reminded the audience that life was fragile and unpredictable. Sydney listened with her heart open, but in the middle of the speech, she noticed movement at the side of the hall. A boy, no older than 12, stood by himself, his hands gripping a folded piece of paper. His shoulders trembled as though he was fighting back tears. Without thinking, Sydney excused herself from the table and walked toward him. She knelt down so her eyes met his. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. The boy shook his head. "I wanted to say something tonight, but I can't. I'm too scared. Everyone will laugh if I cry." He held up the paper, but his hands shook so much the edges crumpled. Sydney's heart ached. She took the paper gently and looked at him. "You don't have to be perfect. Your words matter because they're yours. Sometimes the strongest voices tremble." Keanu, who had been watching from a short distance, walked over and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. His voice was calm, steady, like an anchor. "When I was your age, I thought no one would ever listen to me either. But the truth is, the right people will always hear you. And tonight, I think everyone here needs to hear you." The boy's eyes widened. He looked between them, fear still heavy, but now mixed with a spark of courage. Keanu extended his hand, and Sydney gave an encouraging nod. Together, they led the boy toward the stage. The host noticed them and paused, allowing space for the moment. Whispers spread across the hall again, but this time, curiosity filled the air. The boy stepped up, paper still trembling in his hands. For a second, he froze, staring at the sea of faces. His chest rose and fell quickly, as though he might break. Then he glanced at the edge of the stage, where Sydney stood watching, her hand pressed to her heart, and Keanu stood tall, nodding with steady reassurance. The boy took a shaky breath and began to read. His words were not polished, not practiced like the speeches before, but they were real. He spoke about losing his father, about watching his mother work endless hours, about nights when he wanted to give up. He spoke of the small things that gave him hope, like the kindness of strangers and the dream that one day he could help others too. The hall fell silent. No one moved. No one whispered. The boy's trembling voice filled every corner, and with every word, hearts grew heavier and eyes grew softer. When he finished, there was no delay. The hall erupted in applause, not the forced kind, but the kind that comes from deep inside. People stood, some with tears on their cheeks, clapping until the boy's fear melted into a smile. He looked back at Keanu and Sydney. His eyes were brighter now, as if a weight had lifted from him. In that moment, Sydney realized something powerful. Sometimes unforgettable moments are not about the famous, but about giving space for others to be seen. Keanu's earlier words echoed in her mind. Respect goes further than talent. And now she understood them more deeply than ever. But just as the applause faded, a sudden shift came. At the far end of the hall, a man spoke loudly, his voice sharp. That was touching. But do you think charity alone changes lives? What about the truth people don't want to hear? Kindness won't pay their bills. The room tensed again. Once more, doubt was thrown like a stone into still water, creating ripples of unease. Sydney's heart pounded. She could feel that this night was not just about speeches and kindness anymore. It was turning into a test, one that would reveal the true strength of humility in the face of challenge. The challenge of pride. The words from the man at the far end of the hall spread through the room like cold wind. His tone was sharp, his face hard, and his question was meant not for answers, but for doubt. "Kindness won't pay their bills," he repeated, as though trying to cut through the hope that had just filled the hall. The boy on stage lowered his head, his courage fading under the weight of those words. Sydney's heart clenched. She wanted to shield him from the sting of that challenge. Before she could step forward, Keanu's voice rose, steady but calm. "You're right," he said. "Kindness doesn't pay bills, but kindness gives people strength to face the days when the bills feel impossible. Without strength, nothing else matters." The hall grew quiet again. People leaned in, waiting. The man sneered. "Strength doesn't fill stomachs." Keanu nodded slowly, never losing his calm. "And hunger without hope leaves people broken. We need both. Tonight is about remembering that no matter how small, respect and kindness create the will to keep moving, and without that, nothing else survives." Sydney stepped forward then, her voice clear but soft. "I grew up in a home where we had little. I watched my family fight through days that felt endless. The one thing that carried us was not money, it was dignity. People who treated us with respect gave us the courage to keep going. And that courage is what led me here tonight. So yes, kindness matters more than you think." The room held its breath. The boy on stage lifted his head again, a faint smile returning to his lips. The man who had spoken grew silent, shifting in his place. Though he wanted to argue, he could feel the weight of the truth pressing back. Applause began to rise, not loud at first, but strong and steady. People clapped not only for the boy, but for the words that had defended him. As the sound filled the hall, Keanu leaned closer to Sydney and whispered, "Sometimes pride challenges kindness, but pride never wins when people see the truth." Sydney nodded, her eyes bright. She felt the moment change something deep inside her. She had always believed in kindness, but tonight she saw how it could stand against doubt, even against cruelty. But as the night moved forward, another test arrived. After the speeches ended, people began to mingle again. The boy sat near the front, his notebook in his lap, his shoulders finally relaxed. Sydney joined him, asking about his dreams. He spoke of wanting to become a writer, of wanting to tell stories that gave others the same courage he had just found. Her heart swelled hearing him speak with hope. Keanu stood nearby, speaking with a group of families, listening to their struggles, offering words that were simple, yet powerful. He was not there as a star, but as a man who cared. But then, a different voice broke through. This time it came from a woman dressed elegantly, her tone sharp, her smile tight. "Do you really believe," she said loudly, "that one night of soft words can change years of suffering? This is entertainment for the wealthy, nothing more." The room grew uneasy again. Eyes turned toward her, then toward Keanu and Sydney, waiting to see how they would respond. Sydney felt her chest tighten. This time it wasn't just doubt, it was accusation. Keanu walked closer, his expression calm but firm. "You're right to ask that question," he said. "One night cannot erase years of pain, but one night can plant a seed. Change does not begin with millions of steps, it begins with one." Sydney added softly, "And if that seed gives someone even a small reason to keep going, then tonight matters more than we realize." The woman tilted her head, searching their faces for weakness, but she found none. Instead, she found honesty. And once again the crowd felt the shift. People murmured in agreement, some nodding, some even wiping tears. The boy looked at Sydney and whispered, "They're not just talking. They really believe it." She smiled at him gently. "And so should you." But deep down, Sydney knew something else. The night was far from over. The challenges had not ended. Every time kindness stood tall, pride tried to knock it down. And she could feel a new test coming, one that might push all of them to their limits. The breaking point, the hall had grown restless. After each challenge, the room seemed to split in two, those who believed in kindness and those who doubted it. Every whisper carried tension. Every glance seemed to question what the night was truly about. Sydney could feel it pressing on her chest. She had never been in a room where emotions shifted so sharply. One moment there was hope, the next there was doubt. She wondered if people truly wanted to believe in respect, or if the world had hardened them so much that kindness felt too fragile to trust. Keanu stood tall, calm as always, but Sydney noticed something in his eyes. Behind his steady gaze was weariness, as though he had carried this test many times before. He was no stranger to people questioning kindness, no stranger to the cruelty of doubt, yet he remained silent but firm. Then it happened. The boy who had spoken earlier stood up again, clutching his notebook. His voice was small, but the hall quieted instantly. I want to say one more thing, he said. People turned, waiting. The boy's voice trembled, but he pushed through. I know some of you think this night doesn't matter, but to me, it does. I never thought anyone would listen to me. Tonight, I found courage. Even if tomorrow is hard again, I'll remember this. And if one day I help someone else the way they helped me, then it was worth it. The silence that followed was heavy. Not weak, not empty. Heavy with truth. Applause began slowly, but before it could rise, another voice cut through. This one was louder, angrier, filled with disdain. Enough! A man near the back shouted. This is foolish. Words don't change the world. People need power, not pity. His tone shook the room. The boy's shoulders sagged, and fear returned to his eyes. Sydney felt anger rise inside her, sharp and burning. She wanted to shout back, to defend the boy, but before she could speak, Keanu stepped forward. His voice was low, but it carried across the hall with quiet force. Power without respect destroys. Pity without action fades. But kindness builds. You may not see its strength tonight, but years from now, when this boy grows into a man who carries hope instead of bitterness, you will see it. The man scoffed. Hope is weak. Keanu's eyes held steady. No, hope is the strongest thing a person can carry. Without it, there is nothing. The words hit the room like a wave. Some people nodded, others frowned, but no one could deny the weight in Keanu's voice. Sydney stepped beside him then, her voice trembling but clear. I know what it feels like to doubt hope. I've had nights where I thought I wasn't strong enough, where I thought kindness was useless. But I was wrong. Every time someone believed in me, I found a way to stand again. And tonight, we are showing that to each other. The boy looked at her, his eyes filling with tears, not of fear this time, but of strength. The crowd grew quiet, caught between pride and humility, between doubt and belief. Then, suddenly, the lights flickered. The hall dimmed for a brief moment before glowing again. People gasped softly, some even laughed nervously. But in that flicker, the weight of the night seemed to grow heavier. Sydney felt a chill. She looked at Keanu, who glanced back at her with steady eyes. He didn't need to speak. She understood what he meant. The night was reaching its breaking point. This was no longer about a single speech or a single act of kindness. This was about something larger, proving that humility could stand strong even when pride tried to break it apart. The unseen truth. The flicker of the lights left everyone uneasy. Whispers filled the room, but no one said what they were truly thinking, that the night itself felt fragile, like it could break at any moment. Sydney stood near Keanu, her hands clasped in front of her. She felt her heart beating faster than before. Something about the silence after the lights dimmed carried weight. She could sense that the night was moving toward a turning point. Keanu looked across the hall. His face stayed calm, but his eyes searched the crowd. He saw the boy sitting in the front row, still clutching his notebook as if it were a shield. He saw the families who had come here with hope. And he also saw the guests who doubted, their eyes sharp, their expressions cold. Then, the woman who had challenged them earlier stepped forward again. Her voice was smooth, but it carried pride like a weapon. You speak of hope, you speak of kindness, but have you lived hunger? Have you lived despair? Speeches cannot heal wounds you've never felt. Her words struck deep. Some in the audience nodded, agreeing. Others shifted uncomfortably, unsure. Sydney felt her throat tighten. She wanted to answer, but for the first time that night, doubt pressed heavily against her chest. She thought of her own struggles growing up, the long days when her family worried about money, the way she sometimes cried at night because she felt small. But those struggles were hers, not the same as the ones the woman spoke of. Would people believe her if she spoke now? Before she could decide, Keanu spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried an edge of pain. I have known hunger. I have known loss. I have walked through days when I thought I could not continue. But I also learned this. Pain can make us cruel, or it can make us kind. I chose kindness, because cruelty gives nothing back. His words stunned the hall. It was rare for Keanu to speak of himself, rare for him to show the wounds behind his calm presence. But tonight, he allowed them to see the truth. Sydney felt her heart ache as she listened. She realized in that moment why his words carried so much weight. They were not spoken from distance, but from scars. The boy in the front row raised his hand timidly. My dad used to say the same thing, he whispered. He said pain can make us bitter, or it can make us better. But I didn't understand it until tonight. The hall grew silent again. The woman who had spoken lowered her eyes. For the first time, she had no reply. But the tension was not gone. Another voice rose, this time softer, but filled with coldness. It came from the older man who had mocked them earlier. You keep talking about kindness as if it's stronger than power. But what happens when the world takes everything from you? Will kindness protect you then? Keanu looked at him, then slowly shook his head. Kindness does not protect us from pain, but it protects our soul from becoming the very thing that hurt us. Without it, we lose ourselves. The words fell heavy, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Sydney stepped forward then. Her voice trembled, but she did not hold back. I was once told I wasn't good enough. I was laughed at. I was dismissed. I carried that pain for years, but if I had let it turn me cruel, I would not be standing here tonight. Kindness is not weakness. It is survival. The boy stood up again, his small voice breaking the silence. If they can stand strong, then I can too. The hall erupted in applause, louder than before, but mixed with tears. It was no longer just about the event, no longer about speeches. It was about something real, something everyone felt deep inside. Yet even in that applause, there lingered a tension, like a shadow waiting. Keanu knew it. Sydney felt it. The boy sensed it too, because unforgettable moments are never given easily. They are tested until they break, or until they shine. The final moment, the applause still echoed, but the hall carried a strange stillness beneath the noise. Everyone clapped, yet inside their hearts, they waited for something more. The night had tested kindness again and again, and it felt as though one last test remained before it could truly be called unforgettable. Sydney stood near the boy, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. She could feel the tremor in his small frame, but she also felt the strength rising within him. Keanu stood a few steps away, his gaze steady on the crowd. His calm presence held the room, but even he knew the night had not finished speaking. Then it came. The older man, the loudest doubter of the night, rose once more. His voice cut across the hall like a blade. "Fine words, touching speeches, but none of this will change the world. Tomorrow these families will still wake up to the same struggles. Tonight will be forgotten." The hall went silent again. Even the applause stopped. The boys' shoulders slumped. Some guests lowered their eyes, as if afraid to believe the man was right. Sydney felt her chest tighten. Her voice wanted to rise, but fear gripped her. What if she said the wrong thing? What if she could not change their hearts? Then Keanu stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not show anger. Instead, he looked directly at the man, and then at the whole hall. "Maybe tomorrow will be hard," Keanu said. "Maybe tomorrow they will still struggle. But tonight is not meaningless. Tonight a boy found his courage. Tonight people were reminded that respect still matters, and if even one life carries that forward, then tonight will not be forgotten." He paused, his voice softer but heavier with truth. "The world does not change in one moment. It changes in the hearts of people, little by little, until kindness grows stronger than cruelty." The room held its breath. Then, to everyone's surprise, the boy stepped forward again. His small voice was trembling but brave. "He's wrong," the boy said, looking at the older man. "Tonight won't be forgotten. I won't forget. And one day, I'll make sure other kids like me never forget either." The boy's words struck like lightning. They were not polished, not rehearsed, but they were pure. Applause rose again, stronger, louder, unstoppable. People stood on their feet, clapping until the sound shook the walls. Some cried openly. Others looked at each other with new respect. The atmosphere of doubt was gone, replaced by something brighter, something unshakable. Sydney felt her own tears fall as she clapped with the crowd. Her heart swelled with pride, not for herself, but for the boy who had stood taller than anyone that night. Keanu glanced at her, and in his quiet smile she saw what he meant. Respect had won, humility had endured, kindness had proved its strength. The older man sat down, silent, his face pale. He had no more words to throw. As the applause slowly softened, the boy turned toward Keanu and Sydney. His eyes glistened, but his smile was wide. "Thank you," he whispered. Keanu placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Don't thank us. Tonight, you showed us all what real courage looks like." Sydney knelt so she was eye level with him. "This was your moment, and you made it unforgettable." The boy nodded, his notebook still clutched in his hands, but now he held it with pride instead of fear. The hall began to clear, people leaving with hearts heavier but also lighter in ways they could not describe. They had come expecting another event. Instead, they had witnessed something that would stay with them forever. As the night ended, Sydney looked at Keanu one last time. "You were right," she said softly. "Respect goes further than talent. Tonight proved it." Keanu smiled gently, his eyes warm. "And it always will." They walked out of the hall together side by side, with the boy trailing behind them, carrying not just his notebook, but a new kind of strength. And though the night ended, its echo would live on, carried in the hearts of everyone who had seen how humility, kindness, and courage could turn a simple meeting into an unforgettable moment.